I've been working on a photography project called Syrian Road, and this talk is called Connections on the Syrian Road. As David pointed out, this isn't my job. I do other things to earn a living, but it's been a pretty big challenge. And people always ask me, why do you call yourself Abu Maya? Well, if you know anything about the Arabic language, you know there is no letter P. So when I went to Syria, I started going in 2003 because I married a girl from Damascus. I became Beers, Byers, Bayraz, and heaven forbid, Boris. So I thought, well, you know, I can't go on like this. And then I had a little girl called Maya. We chose the name because it pretty much works in English, in Arabic, anything really. And people started calling me Abu Maya, which means Maya's dad. So I thought, do you know what? I think for this project, this would be the most appropriate name to use. So I went with my wife. We'd been many, many times, and we decided to travel up to the east of Syria. So we were going from Damascus all the way up to Raqqa. And as you know, Raqqa is one of the places where some pretty terrible things have been happening. And I used a very cheap plastic toy camera. And when I say very cheap, I'm talking it cost 10 quid. It's got one shutter speed and two settings, sunny and cloudy. Most of the time I forgot to change it, so some of the exposures are a bit weird. We saw many things with the Syrian desert, which isn't all sandy and pretty like in Lawrence of Arabia, but rather rocky and looks a bit like the moon. And we also saw fantastic things like the Euphrates at Deir ez-Zor. One of the things that you do notice about the desert is roads are very, very straight. So the road to Palmyra is quite straight. The road from Palmyra is quite straight. And they're literally just straight roads straight across. And of course, we saw towns and villages and bumped into people, but we also saw these things. The Temple of Baal-Shamin and the Temple of Bel, which sadly, as we all know, are no longer with us. In fact, actually, obviously at home, we live the Syrian crisis day by day, and it's quite difficult. But it's very weird with all the awful things that happened. But my wife and I discussed that when this was taken over by ISIS, this was almost the worst thing that we imagined could happen, because we knew all these beautiful buildings were just going to be blown up. And then I started thinking, you know, everyone hears about Syria, and nobody really knows anything about it at all. So I started to try and think, well, you know, what things do we have and we use in our daily lives that, you know, might give us some sort of connection to Syria? So I thought I'd start with this lady, Zenobia. A lot of people have heard of her, and this quote is attributed to her. I have no idea whether it's true or not, but it does sound pretty good. And then I started looking into Zenobia. She was taken as a prisoner by the Emperor Aurelius about the end of the 3rd century AD, and nobody really knows what happened to her. The most romantic story is the Romans were so impressed by her beauty and poise that they set her free and she married a senator. Whether that happened or not, I don't know. But she may have committed suicide, she might have been executed, or she might have died of an illness. Nobody really knows. But actually, when I thought of the name Zenobia, I started to look and think, well, you know, where has this name been used? And you find she pops up quite a lot. She's Conan the Barbarian's wife in a comic strip. She's had boats named after her. Rossini and Albioni have both written operas about her. She's sold perfumes, camping equipment, and cameras. Now, obviously, being a photographer, who wouldn't want a 1950s Japanese Zenobia Flex camera, which is pretty much as crappy as it looks, but I'm quite glad to have it. But she also appears in some more serious stuff. You've probably heard of the Canterbury Tales. Well, in the Monk's Tale, he tells a tragic tale of the story of Zenobia. She dared to seek the wild beast in its den. I'm not entirely sure I know what that means. I wasn't very good at school, but it does sound quite good. But she wasn't the only person to speak, you know, in writing that's been pretty impressed by her. She's was esteemed the most lovely as the most heroic of her sex. Yet again, I don't really know what that means, but I think it's good. And that's Edward Gibbon, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I actually discovered I had a copy of that, and when you see it, you realise why you haven't read it. It's about 1,000 pages long. And she's also appeared in some slightly more popular books, including Zenobia, Empress of Lust. Strong men were destroyed by the wiles of the sultry Queen Zenobia. And you'd be very pleased to know that everything works out well, and at the end of it, she's not just Queen of Palmyra, but Petra in Jordan as well. I don't quite know how that happens, but it really is a very poor book indeed. So, that's one person, but let's, try and think what else we know about references to Syria. Well, the first reference of Damascus actually appears in the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verse 2, which is, I think, pretty incredible. And every time I sort of think that, I think that's pretty amazing. There's this guy, André Parrot, who was a French archaeologist who is attributed, and if you go to Syria and you meet a tour guide, they will always tell you this. Every man has two homelands, his own and Syria. And I think, of course, what this is referring to is that Syria, is often considered part of the cradle of civilization. So if we look at the next thing here, I put three quite random-looking things here. Olives. Well, what's so special about olives? They think that in Syria they were cultivating edible olives 7,000 years ago, which shows a hugely sophisticated society. So, they'd moved on from hunter-gatherers. We were still living in ditches, I suspect, and they were doing things like that. The alphabet. No one's really sure where the alphabet comes from, but this alphabet's from Ugarit, which is near Aleppo, and it dates from about 1500 BC. It consists of 30 letters, 27 consonants and 3 vowels, and surprisingly, it's read left to right rather than right to left. As you know, Arabic's right to left. And soap. Again, nobody really knows where soap originated from, but by the 10th century, the soap industry in Syria was huge. I mean, it was on an industrial scale, and the formula that they basically used for soap now is pretty much the same formula that we still use today. If you can get hold of this soap, it is really, really nice. You can still get some on the internet, but I guess it's not really being made anymore. And then I started thinking, well, there's the religious connection. We've all heard about the road to Damascus and Saul's conversion. So there's a picture of that. And then there's the Umayyad Mosque. And I think one of the most extraordinary things about when you go to the Umayyad Mosque is there's this great big gold sort of tomb thing in the middle of it. And everyone says, oh, what's that? Well, I certainly said, what's that? And that's where John the Baptist is buried. So John the Baptist is buried in a mosque in Damascus because the mosque in Damascus was previously the site of a church. And I think one of the things that you're very aware when I used to go to Syria was just how religions and different groups of people would just live pretty happily side by side. I started looking at other things. Aleppo gets 2 shout-outs from Shakespeare. The 3 witches on the left, which I suspect that's what those 3 are. They don't look very nice. They ask where somebody is, and it says he's gone to Aleppo. That's it. But on Othello, if you know your Shakespeare, you know there are some Othello committed some pretty grievous acts in Aleppo. And Aleppo's a city that's really, it's so fantastic when you go around, like Damascus, so many things happen there. Murder on the Orient Express. Obviously not, you wouldn't think that. It's not actually set in Syria, but it was written there in a hotel called the Baron Hotel, which was supposed to be Syria's premier hotel when it was built some time ago. It's sadly shut, and it was a pretty extraordinary place to go and stay. You really went back in time. And I've always liked the fact that Agatha Christie, when she wrote this book there, wrote it in room 203. I don't know why they know that, but I always quite like that. But also that Lawrence of Arabia, when he stayed there, preferred room 202. And Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern-day Turkey, preferred 201. And King Faisal of Iraq preferred 215. Now, I don't know if that really makes any sort of difference to anything, but I think it's quite interesting. Other people who stayed there included David Rockefeller, Charles Lindbergh, and Charles de Gaulle. Now, cricket. Now, Syria was never very famous for playing cricket, but the first ever recorded cricket match outside England took place in Syria in 1676 between British tradesmen who were living in the city. So it proves that there were quite a lot of people there because, of course, Aleppo was at one of the centres of trade at the time. So I've also then tried to think about people that we've heard of here who have Syrian roots. Now, the gentleman on the left, plays ice hockey for a team called the Columbus Blue Jackets, that's it. And he used to play for a team called the Chicago Blackhawks. Yeah, Blackhawks, yes. And he's won the Stanley Cup with them a couple of times. Now, his father is from Syria, and he actually talks, if you look him up on the internet, he talks quite a lot about his Syrian family, and it's quite interesting. And a lot of them have gone to live with him now in the States. Paula Abdul, slightly deranged woman from X Factor in the States, and this really irritating song, because I foolishly looked at it up on YouTube, and it took me about 3 weeks to get it out of my head. And everybody's favourite, Lois Lane, Terry Hatcher, both of them have Syrian roots. And it goes on and on and on. Steve Jobs and his sister, Mona Simpson, they didn't meet each other until their mid-20s. Their father, their birth father was from Homs, and they were both adopted later on. And this gentleman, F. Murray Abraham, his parents were Syrian. He won an Oscar for his portrayal of Salieri in the film Amadeus, and he's better known now as the baddie out of Homeland, but I can't remember what his name is, but there we are. And I keep on finding odd references to Syria. I find magazines when I look for things. I found this excellent Scooby-Doo magazine where Shaggy and Scooby, somebody doesn't get away with it because of the pesky kids. And that was quite interesting. And it's got sort of recipes, and there's a very odd section about the Crusades with a slightly basic version of history in it. Stella Tennant, she once launched a collection of hers on the streets of Damascus, but she wasn't the first to do it. Vogue had done it in 1969 in Palmyra. And if you can find those pictures on the internet, they're quite hard to find, but they are very beautiful. And Jeremy Clarkson, of course, everybody's favourite buffoon. Well, not mine particularly. But he did say of Damascus that it is one of his 5 favourite films, 5 favourite cities in the world, and you can't really blame him for that. So there's a lot of writing, which I draw your attention to, that if you want to find out more of what people are thinking there. And I'm just looking forward to the day when I can go back to Syria and we can look for little dots on the map, and we go down little tracks and we go down little lanes, and then when we get there, you're on your own and you're confronted with something like that, because it is pretty special. So thank you very much for listening to me. I don't like talking about pictures, and I don't like public speaking, so I hope it wasn't too bad. And if you're interested in the book, we're in the process of doing it now. In fact, we've had the first few copies come through, and if you'd like to see them, Marie's got some. And it's called SyrianRoad.com. Thank you very much.